Welcome, NSF. We are very pleased that everybody's here to join us for a fascinating talk about energy security and the energy transition and national security. Let me introduce our excellent speakers from the CNA Military Advisory Board. Vice Admiral Gunn, who you've heard a couple years ago, who gave an excellent talk on energy grid transmission challenges and national security. And Mr. Tom Morehouse, who is joining us, who is also an advisor from the Military Advisory Board. And with us today, we also are honored to have Sherry Rosenblum, who's with CNA and manages the Military Advisory Board, and also Sarah Fusco, who is one of the analysts for the MAB. So with that, I will turn it over to Lee to start us off.
Well, thanks, Maureen. It's really great to be here, and I appreciate your invitation to us and the invitation from the National Security Forum. It's good to be back for another conversation, this time involving energy and climate. As a reminder to those who know, and as well as those who don't know the Military Advisory Board at CNA to this point, I'm listing quickly the names and a line on either the current engagement or the final uniform position of the 33 retired officers who currently or have been members of the Military Advisory Board. We'll roll through these. There is a former Commandant of the Marine Corps. There's a former ambassador to China who was the Pacific Area Commander. There is a Coast Guard officer who was the Atlantic Area Commander. We have a couple of real climate scientists. We have an astronaut. All these people have been senior officers as we have proceeded through the now 13 years of the Military Advisory Board. So let me put up the 11 members of the MAB. To begin with, we started in 2006 and published our first report in 2007. There were 11 members on that first study. The first report was National Security and the Threat of Climate Change. All of these reports you see on the screen are available at cna.org/MAB, M-A-B. A dozen or so MAB members participate in each of our studies. In the subsequent 7 reports, the MAB has dealt with issues related both to our national security and, most importantly, the global transitions to new forms of energy generation and storage. Enormous growth in energy demand are forecast. We'll talk more about that as we go along. The way future demand will be met and how future supply will be provided are hugely important to the global economy and climate. Next slide, please. The new administration is making a strong start in both climate and energy. Some quotes are here to illustrate that security is more than military strength, that our economic security is linked to others, that is, other nations, that working with friends is not only desirable, but necessary, and that getting our part of the energy transition right is vital. There are many other quotes we could put in these places to illustrate that point, but for the sake of time, we won't go into those. Could we have the next view graph, please? In our first MAB report, we identified several important links between the changing climate and the national security of the United States. We also offered several examples of our world in transition, examples that are already having direct and indirect effects on our military, thus on our national security directly. Principal among those examples are the unpredictability of climate itself and the environmental impact of changes we are already experiencing. We also have given a great deal of consideration over the course of our studies to the obstacles and opportunities for our military associated with the growing demand for energy worldwide and the emergence of advanced means of generating energy to satisfy as much of the increased demand as possible. Tom Morehouse and I will be talking about those issues over the next half hour or so. Next view graph, please. Here are some images. You could replace these with your own that you have seen of the impact of a changing climate around the world. Next view graph, please. The effects of our changing climate vary from one part of the globe to another. Even so, we see increases everywhere in dramatic climate events, floods, mudslides, droughts, fires, cyclones. Places like the Russian high north are burning that have not burned in recent human history. Droughts and floods drive people to starvation or migration in many parts of the world. Indigenous people in the high north of Canada and the United States are losing their roads, the foundations of their homes, and their hunting grounds are shifting and melting under them. Populations are growing in many places. People are moving, concentrating in cities and gathering at coastlines. The resources of the earth will be under increasing pressure from people who need the basics simply to survive, and also want the luxuries enjoyed already by many in the developed world. Chaos may result from the failure of struggling nations in the future to provide even the basics of human life. Joining forces with our historic allies and friends, and bringing into the fold new nations representing people striving for a better life will both be vital for the security of the United States in preparing to deal with the changes predicted for our climate. Next slide, please. The US military can be a humanitarian and stabilizing force. Men and women of our armed services have played these roles for many years. New opponents will most likely emerge to take advantage of desperation and disorder that results from the changing climate, or to increase both the desperation and disorder. Said a different way, the immediate future faced by people across the world will increase the need for our men and women in uniform to help improve stability, especially in weak nations and ungoverned areas, and to help relieve suffering and foster recovery in areas subjected to the new violence of climate. New training, perhaps new organizations will be required to adapt to some of the needs of that new world. Our forces must be manned, trained, and equipped to face the tasks ahead. Next view graph, please. Bringing the threats home. National security begins right here. National power and national security rest on four pillars: economic strength, diplomatic strength, military might, and the security of our people and institutions at home. So I suggest that our work list must include renewing the structures underpinning the welfare of Americans at home, rebuilding our robust domestic economy, reinforcing the work of our public servants on the front lines of domestic responses to the effect of climate change, and importantly, reducing the vulnerability of our electrical distribution system, just as we discussed a couple of years ago, and producing America's power in a clean, safe, and reliable way. These last two, producing clean, safe, and reliable power and distributing it on a safe, secure, modern electrical systems, are key not only to supporting America's growth and influence in this century, but also key to meeting our nation's obligations to helping avoid the worst possible effects of the wilding of our climate. Next chart, please. Various estimates of population growth peg the world's human numbers around 9 billion or so by 2050. There are about 7.3 billion of us today. More people will need more energy. Energy is the key ingredient, after all, in development and health. There will also be greater pressure to produce more energy to allow people who live in poverty today to achieve the relative wealth and comfort of a better life. Most predictions about regional population increases estimate an additional 500 million people in South Asia and 1 billion more in Africa. We'll look at that a little more closely in a minute. America's friends and opponents alike are taking meaningful steps to secure energy supplies for the future. China, for example, is reaching out to African nations to secure access to fossil fuels. Their outreach has diplomatic, public health, and economic overtones. In exchange for access, the People's Republic of China seeks not only energy resources, but leases on fertile land to feed its population now and in the future. Emerging markets for clean energy clean sources of energy are already fostering relationships between nations depending on energy for growth and nations that are nurturing energy technology while also leading in manufacturing clean energy systems. Next view graph, please. The United States Energy Information Administration says in its International Energy Outlook 2019 that energy demand and consumption by between 2010 and 2050 will grow approximately in the way described on this chart by region. Increases are small for nations in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, generally considered the more developed nations, and the remainder of Europe and Eurasia. Changes will be somewhat larger by percentage in parts of the non-OECD world and very large in Asia. Next view graph, please. BP's Energy Outlook 2020 predicts changes in the distribution of energy by fuel source from 2018 to 2050. On their chart, fuel sources are listed on the horizontal axis of the graph, and ranges of uncertainty associated with each are portrayed by the length of the vertical bars. The vertical axis of the graph is a measure of the positive and negative changes year over year in the growth or shrinkage in the use of each fuel source for the generation of energy. The green bars depict the range of annual change, again, year over year, forecast by an expert group of energy forecasters for BP. The yellow, the range of forecasts of annual changes produced for the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. These yellow bars reflect the IPCC thinking on the energy scenarios that need to play out to restrain the world's temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. The black horizontal lines are the medians of the several IPCC forecasts. The orange dot represents the distribution of derived energy from the sources in the scenario portraying a very rapid transition to advanced energy. Note that all agree that there will overall be a dramatic growth in renewables and shrinkage in the use of fossil fuels. Next view graph, please. The 2020 Energy Outlook by BP also considers 3 main scenarios, which explore different pathways for the global energy systems to 2050. In every case, the factors we just discussed that serve to grow demand are assumed, both more people and more aspirations for them. Additionally, BP forecasts a decline in global oil demand, but I've got serious reservations about that because it's predicated on renewables advancing quickly enough to fulfill all or most of our added demand. We certainly hope that's true, but if it's not, the effect is overall going to be very bad for the climate. The scenarios are not predictions of what is likely to happen or what BP, formerly British Petroleum, would like to happen. Rather, the scenarios help to illustrate the range of outcomes possible over the next 30 years, although the uncertainty is substantial, and the scenarios do not and cannot provide a comprehensive description of all the possible outcomes. But here are the 3. The rapid transition scenario posits a series of policy measures led by a significant increase in carbon prices and supported by more targeted sector-specific measures, which cause carbon emissions from energy use to fall by 70% by 2050. This decline in emissions is in line with scenarios which are consistent with limiting the rise in global temperature by 2100 to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The second one, the net scenario, that is net zero scenario, is more ambitious. It assumes all of the policy things embodied in rapid and are both added to and reinforced by significant shifts in societal behavior and preferences. We have to change the way we do business, which further accelerates the reduction in carbon emissions. Global carbon emissions from energy use in net zero fall by over 95% in 2050. That's broadly in line with the range of scenarios which are consistent with limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The business as usual scenario is pretty much hands off. It assumes that government policies, technologies, and social preferences continue to evolve in a manner and at a speed seen over the recent past. A continuation of that progress, albeit relatively slow, means carbon emissions peak in the mid-2020s. Despite this peaking, though, little headway is made in terms of reducing carbon emissions from energy use, with emissions in 2050 less than 10% below 2018 levels. Primary energy demand increases by around 10% in rapid and net zero and over the outlook, and by about 25% as business as usual. Next chart. It is our view that over the coming decades, despite shifts to advanced energy power systems for electric vehicles, China's growing energy demand will continue to exceed its ability to meet needs internally, resulting in more oil and natural gas imports by that country. As a related matter, I believe that the potential for drilling in the South China Sea motivates the Chinese expansionism there as much as does its desire to bolster its national defense. China's improving relations with Iran is undoubtedly motivated largely by energy too. We are also concerned that, absent US involvement, the billions of dollars China is investing in advanced energy systems and fossil resources around the world, especially in developing nations, will tie these nations to China diplomatically and economically, resulting in Chinese advantage over the US in both trade and geopolitics. This elaborates just a bit on my mention a minute ago of China in Africa. This will come up later too. Our experience tells us that in the emerging energy landscape, China's projects, such as those already seen across Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, are targeted to securing power for its long-run energy needs and to expanding its global influence. Next slide, please. Russia's federal budget is very closely tied to the global price of petroleum because the Russian economy depends to such a great extent on the export of petroleum products. Russia will not readily forsake oil and gas, but is active in the international marketplace for advanced nuclear power generation too. Russia's outreach, like China's, is laying the groundwork and helping modernize the petroleum infrastructure of two of its prime customers, helping to bolster the future of the fossil marketplace. Back on nuclear power for a second. Russia, together with China, is doing much of the contracting for, in fact, the vast majority of the contracting for, construction of, and planning to participate in the future operation of modern nuclear power plants around the world. Next chart, please. India ranks near the top of the list of oil importing nations. India continues to be one of OPEC's best customers. Combustion of oil accounts for satisfying about 1/3 of the nation's demand for energy and is supporting many sectors of the Indian economy. Coal and various forms of biomass constitute most of the balance, and the burning of all these forms of combustibles contributes to the nation's very unhealthful air and water quality. It's clear that there would be profound benefits for the Indian people from transitioning as quickly as possible to advanced energy and associated technology for energy storage. The Modi government has set as a goal for 2040 the application of solar, wind, and nuclear power to satisfying more than half of the nation's electrical demand. It's worth noting too that no place in the world is better positioned than India to bring the enormous benefits of advanced energy and its inherent ability and adaptability for microgrids to the unpowered portion of its population. Next slide, please. Many places on the African continent may also offer those without access today to clear, reliable energy the option of skipping an intermediate step that more developed nations have made in developing their energy transmission systems. Distributed local electrical generation using renewables will, I predict, employ advanced energy in some regions on microgrids, eliminating the need for those regions to develop long-haul electrical transmission infrastructure. Today, per capita energy usage is low across Africa, yet the continent is endowed with great amounts of accessible fossil fuels. Thus, a great deal of oil is exported to markets that have relied historically on overseas imports. China is eyeing the continent as an important future source of fossil fuels. A great many of Africa's people still rely on biomass for energy too, often charcoal for cooking. Only a small percentage of African electrical power is currently generated by burning oil. Insofar as possible, ridding the world of charcoal cooking will have to be among the many objectives of transitioning to advanced energy. Next slide, please. And again on Africa, this time with China. If, however, the growing population of Africa transitions soon to advanced forms of energy, not only will clean electricity be more widely available, but energy may be transmitted in those smaller, more secure systems. Microgrids will allow generators and consumers of electricity to be much closer to one another. Long-haul transmission lines, again, will be needed less. Less power will be lost to heat in line transmissions. Control systems will be more secure. Investments can be focused on projects dedicated to providing the maximum return for growing the economies and standards of living. China is reaching out to the continent in a variety of ways, financing dams and other renewable energy projects, and is hugely involved in the development of African energy capacity. Chinese engagement extends to largely underwriting a good deal of African infrastructure development. Diplomatic engagement is increasingly accompanying China's growing roles as consumer, builder, and lender to support African economic and energy development. Next slide, please. What does this mean for our security? Remembering that the transition to advanced forms of energy production is inevitable and underway worldwide, what will be our place in defining and be benefiting from the transition? Both friends and potential future foes are investing in research, development, and deployment of advanced means of energy generation and storage. The growing demand for renewables will, we believe, outpace the increasing demand for energy overall. That means we have the chance to help wean the world's energy supply, largely entirely of fossil fuels. Oil and gas extracted by horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, commonly known as fracking, and by deep water drilling are the kinds of unconventional extractions that will be needed only temporarily. Economic, diplomatic, infrastructure, and national security for the United States lie in leading the transition and helping spread its benefits widely. We need to do more. Next slide, please. What we choose to do will have an enormous influence on how, or even whether, we remain a world power. Let me say that again. How or even whether we remain a world power. National power in the coming world will rely more than ever on competitiveness and commerce. Power during and after the transition will require an enhanced, not diminished, involvement and leading and spreading the benefits of the energy transition. Our national security, economic, domestic, diplomatic strength, and military power in coming years will be a destiny we choose by choosing a path to the advanced energy world. Next, it's not as though investments and leadership will not be in our best interests anyway. Our energy leadership will be accompanied by improved competitiveness with attendant robust employment and growth in our economy. Diplomatic influence will grow as well, fostered both by the strength of American innovation and our work to share its benefits. If, on the other hand, we wait for others to find the answers, build the solutions, and spread them, we believe that these on the list here are just some of the opportunities we will forfeit. Next slide, please. Although there is much work underway in America right now, there's lots more work to do. We haven't talked much about efficiency, but lots of fruit is still dangling within reach on the trees and vines of existing energy usage in our country, lots overseas too. Turn off the lights, lower the temperature in the winter, raise the temperature in the summer. The Biden administration plan shows increased support for RD&D. That's good, and we hope the support lasts. As coal demand has fallen, of course, domestic production has as well. There are programs in place already, helping to ease the loss of drilling and underground and surface mining jobs. More will be needed, not just in coal country, but in the oil patch too. This is part of the transition that federal, state, and local governments can't afford to bungle. Industry and academia must be brought in to help. This is really important. Spreading the benefits of advanced energy widely is very much in our own interest. Not only will we grow our international influence, but 95% of America's customers are beyond our borders. Our military is our nation's biggest user of energy. There's a role then, a big role, for our forces to play. We have an expert with us today to explain it for us. Over to Tom Morehouse.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate the build-up here. The big push within DoD today is energy resilience. It's maintaining energy resilience, but no carbon, low carbon, and energy resilience are not mutually exclusive. There is a path to low carbon, no carbon future that also involves improving the resilience of energy supplies, not just to DoD, but for the country as well. And this manifests itself in a number of different ways throughout the department. And I'll start with our installations. The mission of our installations has really evolved over the past couple of decades, from that of primarily training and maintenance and so forth, to in the battle space 24/7, command control, reconnaissance, surveillance, battle space awareness, information analysis, kinetic and cyber operations going on all the time. They are no longer a sanctuary, but they are in the fight all the time. And they are plugged into the national grid just like our households are, and DoD's installations are dependent on 90%, 98% of their energy from the grid. And so this presents some issues with respect to mission continuity when the grid goes down and those sorts of things. We're also concerned about the energy being used by our operational forces. Every system that we deploy requires increasing amounts of energy, and the environment in which they're operating becomes more and more hostile. So providing energy to those forces through logistics networks is becoming very expensive, not just in terms of dollars, but also forces that need to protect those lines of communication and lives lost when they're attacked. And we saw that when we were involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our adversary couldn't take us on head on. They would attack the soft underbelly. And that led to General Mattis's famous cry, unleash us from the tether of fuel. So these are some of the driving forces there. There's currently a very strong push within DoD across these areas, installations and operations. And some new sources of funding have come available for this. A military construction program that used to be just the Energy Conservation Investment Program is now the Energy Conservation and Resilience Investment Program. So it's not just investments in infrastructure upgrades to save energy, but it's to enable more resilient energy as well. There are new policy mandates around backup power for critical missions and installations, and the pushes on these systems that are founded upon renewable energy and storage and things like that, rather than traditional diesel gen sets and so forth. There's a lot of increases in research and development that's been unleashed recently in the energy space specifically. In fact, there's a new program that was just authorized by the 21 National Defense Authorization Act that calls for a new prototyping and demonstration project for new energy technologies. Interagency collaboration is also important between DoD and DOE and others, and there's a renewed interest in strengthening that collaboration, particularly between DoD and DOE, as it comes to strengthening our national grid, identifying and reducing vulnerabilities, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Next slide, please. There are really three policy options currently being discussed in terms of vulnerabilities, resilience, and energy to military operations. The first is for installations really focusing behind the fence line. Every installation is different. If you've seen an installation, you've seen one. The solution, it really has to be tailored to that installation circumstances, although there is a common set of tools in the toolkit, if you will. And behind the fence, there's a simple way is to network the current generators that they've got. The more sophisticated approach is to build a microgrid on the installation. A lot of installations today have single generators that are tied to single buildings. Those are not as reliable or as resilient as oftentimes missions dictate. So there's a push. In fact, the push was explicitly mentioned in the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, calling for the provision of more energy sources local to the base or within the fence line. But there are probably the most popular or famous microgrid going on right now is at Miramar Naval Air Station in San Diego, the most sophisticated one within DoD. The next level of vulnerability and resilience, if you will, is at the distribution level, working with local utilities, working with municipalities. DoD can also now spend money outside of the fence line at the local distribution level to help resolve some vulnerability, affect the base's ability to operate, and reduce the number of times and the period of time with which grids will go down. So this is a new investment area for DoD as well, that local distribution area. And then finally, at the national level, working with the Department of Energy, there's a Defense Critical Energy Infrastructure program launched, because national security is not just a defense mission. There are a lot of functions across government that are crucial to our national security, including CDC, for example, as we've just seen with the pandemic, hospitals, law enforcement, ports and airports, if there's a national disaster and we need to move people and services and goods around. So really it's in the interest of DoD to recognize itself as part of a broader national interagency team tasked with strengthening the resilience of our national energy backbone. And DoD has a role to play here. For example, DoD installations could be a center for grid scale energy storage that not only provide power to military missions when the grid goes down, but also helps to make the grid itself more resilient. But this also helps make the grid more low carbon, because you need storage on the grid in order to enable a lot more renewable energy to be deployed across the grid because of its intermittent nature. So these storage centers can also provide black start capability for the grid itself. Most power plants get their power from what they produce. So when they go down, they need a separate source of power to begin to bring themselves back up, to operation back up. DoD installations can play an important role in this as well. Next chart, please. We're going to need tech to do a lot of this stuff. Tech makes this easier, it makes it cheaper, it makes it more resilient. And here I've listed a number of categories of ongoing work that really hold some promise in the future. And I'll just go through them very quickly. Gallium arsenide cells are thin, they're lightweight, they're flexible, they're high efficiency, they're very robust. Currently, they are limited to space operations because they're a couple $100 per watt. There are some new manufacturing technologies being developed here in the US that have the promise of bringing those costs down at least one, likely two orders of magnitude. What that does is it creates new applications for solar cells, and it also, because we have the IP here in the US, will enable us to establish a domestic PV manufacturing capability that we have not had in a decade because it's all been exported overseas. But if we can hang on to the IP, we can reestablish a domestic capability. Perovskites, as you can probably tell by the name, is discovered by the Russians. It is a mineral discovered in the Ural Mountains. It also has the ability to convert sunlight into electrons. And right now, the US owns more patents, is doing more, making more investment in the development of perovskites than anyone else. The real value of perovskites is that these solar cells can be produced like we print newspaper. It's an aqueous process, and it just comes off rolls, making it extremely cheap to make. Right now, the efficiency is fairly high, up in the high 20s. The problem is it's salt-based, so it is not very robust. You can wash it off with a hose, for example, if you coat something with it. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of stabilizing the tech and so forth. Storage, lots of different kinds of storage, cost, safety, energy density, recharge times, all of those things have to improve in order to really expand storage to the level that we need. Microreactors, this is not a near-term play, if you will, but new fuel technologies, new reactor designs, these are in the sub-megawatt to single or perhaps low double-digit megawatt size, municipality campuses, military bases, that sort of thing. Cellulosic biomass fuels, they say now if we can get carbon up to about $50 a ton in terms of value, cellulosic biomass now becomes competitive, and this is carbon neutral because it's the carbon we take out of the earth in terms of waste agricultural products and the like, turn that into fuel. The problem with some of the techno-economic analysis right now show that some of these waste products are free, but once they have a market value, they're not going to be any free anymore. So the economics of that is a little bit up in the air. Green hydrogen, green methane, electrons produced by renewable sources, air, water, and a catalyst. If they can produce that cost effectively, we now have a carbon neutral way of producing those fuels. Power electronics are important because of our ability to handle high-powered, high-voltage electricity coming off of renewable sources and doing it in small packages. So this is important to energy density. If we're going to convert things like transportation systems, particularly large trucks and aircraft and so forth, to primarily electrical platforms, we need a lot of high power electronics, intelligent controls and algorithms to manage all of this stuff, and then of course cyber protection to keep all of this stuff safe, because these are all intelligent networks. And then finally, the cheapest and the easiest technical pathway to reducing our carbon emissions, as Lee mentioned earlier, energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So the roles for DoD. So really, how does DoD play in all of this? DoD should continue to focus on its mission. It should continue to do what it does, but it should also look for where the lines cross. Where do these pathways to more operational capability, more energy resilience, also produce no carbon or low carbon outcomes? And they should continue to be aggressive in collaborating with others to figure out where those lines do cross, so that so for example, innovations that DoD comes up with to meet its needs, if it's an innovation in the energy space, it will undoubtedly find commercial applications. There's a lot of stuff going on in the commercial world that finds applicability to DoD, but everybody has to be talking to each other. And because energy innovations that DoD is interested in solve battlefield problems, there's a value proposition that is that is separate from the commercial marketplace. So DoD has a natural role as a high value early adopter for innovative technologies. This gives manufacturers experience, cost, reliability, and it gives people confidence that the tech works. So DoD can really be an accelerator, a catalyst to moving these technologies from the laboratory into the commercial marketplace. And finally, as Lee alluded to, there's a soft power dimension to this. DoD has a lot of security cooperation agreements with militaries of other countries, allies and partners, a lot of developing countries, and integrating energy into those security cooperation agreements is a way of helping provide some soft power pathways to those partnerships that we'll need going forward. Back over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Tom. That really is a great rundown on what DoD is up to and some of the technologies involved. 3 quick view graphs on what's happening in Nevada. I was raised in San Joaquin Valley of California. I've been a frequent and happy visitor to Nevada over the years. As Westerners, we share an understanding of the importance of this great state to national defense and to our nation's future transition to advanced energy as well. The many advantages of advanced energy play really well here. Nevada can play a vital role in demonstrating to others the possibilities of advanced energy while reaping the benefits of that transition for Nevadans. Clean energy should be and can be a vital part of the economic recovery of this state. Innovative use of technology in the energy arena should be a major focus of Nevada's stimulus investments. Natural gas continues to play an important role, though, in generating electricity for Nevada, but all gas must be imported. Gas has been helpful in phasing out coal as a fuel for generation of electricity in the United States, but long-term energy security here in Nevada, as in the other states, as a whole, will rely on capitalizing on the benefits of renewables and other forms of advanced energy, including nuclear that Tom referred to. The governor's climate strategy has it right, adding some concrete steps to accelerate the state's transition to using and benefiting from new energy. Next slide, please. Nevada is blessed with geography and geology and weather as conducive for advanced energy generation as any state in the country. It's easy to imagine Nevada exporting energy generated here to other less fortunate areas of our country. A far better future can have Nevada's energy generated by renewables and other advanced forms of energy generation and storage, and perhaps, as I said, exported in not just energy, but as technologies overseas as well. Public-private partnerships, something that the DoD has employed, are paying off for the Defense Department, allowing savings while improving energy reliability. Nellis Air Force Base is a prime example. Next slide, and final slide, please. There's a payoff for Nevada workers too, if this is done well. In both hourly wages and number of jobs created, advanced energy work stacks up very well against other sectors of employment. A last comment on the economics of the transition for workers in the fossil fuel industry. Demand in the US for all fossil fuels is declining. Displacement of workers in the oil patch and coal regions is already occurring. It's vital that these people's talents not be lost, that they be retained, and the displaced workers have a shot at new employment in energy as well as in other sectors. Providing pathways to work for them in the new forms of energy will be a vital part of a well-managed transition to advanced energy. Maureen, back to you.
Thank you, Lee. That was excellent. And Sarah, if you will stop sharing your screen, we'll bring back our speakers to answer some questions. Excellent presentation, and thank you for walking through not only the issues that we're facing from a national security perspective, Lee really appreciated that, but bringing it back down home as to how DoD has really focused on resiliency. I think that's an important concept here, rather than simply saying we're committed to renewables. You're actually focusing on what makes military operations function and base operations function. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to consider, both in the military sector, but also in the civilian sector, that we really need to underpin our ideas about resiliency, not just renewables. So with that, let me jump in and ask a few questions. And I think the first one is exceedingly insightful. We talk a lot about carbon emissions from different fuel sources, different energy sources. Do we actually account for the life cycle of those energy sources? So for instance, when we talk about, zero emissions from solar or wind, do those calculations of emissions really account for the end to end? What does it take to extract the materials to build the solar fields, to build the wind plants? What do you do with the materials after the fact? I mean, we seem to be very focused on what happens during the energy generation phase. How do we account for that life cycle of emissions from renewables and other energy sources? So I'll bounce it to Tom. You want to take a start on that?
Sure. The answer is it kind of depends on who's doing the calculation, but if you're going to do a life cycle calculation, the answer is it should account for all of those things. But there are some uncertainties in that as well. If you have a PV manufacturing facility in a place that is primarily driven by renewable energy, you've got a lot of wind energy, or you're relying on hydro, the carbon footprint of that plant is going to be much different than if it is a plant that's located in a place that's primarily deriving their power from coal power plants, for example. The other thing is these manufacturing costs are one-time costs. The main carbon footprint with power production is the ongoing supply of coal or oil or natural gas, the transportation of those commodities to the plant that create the footprint. So the answer is yes, but in reality, that's, if you're comparing a wind turbine or a PV array farm to a natural gas plant, that initial cost of production is really working in the margins.
Excellent, thanks. Lee, do you have something to add to that?
Well, just to support what Tom said, it does depend on who's doing the arguing and what the program is you're trying to sell. In fact, we talk very often about the benefits of renewables and storage and the like, without adequately considering both the cost of creating the devices that allow us to do that. And in some cases, we are a little disingenuous because we talk about the life cycle savings against the continual supply of fossil fuels, the life cycle savings of advanced energy. And we start at the point of inception, that is when you turn the switch. And that's fine, the comparison is very strong, but we need to not miss the opportunity to convince manufacturers that they play a critical role, as Tom said, in reducing the carbon signature of the things that not only are produced, but the things that are used to produce them, energy and materials and the like.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Really appreciate your discussion. I'm going to bounce a question that I'm going to start with Lee on. Is there, do you believe, having seen this, and certainly from the MAB focus on both climate and energy for well over a decade, is there the political will now to both spend the resources, but to actually do the hard roll up your sleeves work of making these the energy transition goals that were outlined come to fruition? is that practical? Or do you see something now in this administration that's different, or are we still chasing unicorns and rainbows?
The optimist in me says that the political will can be created before the conditions are so dire that it's too late to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. But that's got to be the hope. I think the things that the administration has indicated from the outset it intends to do, and recently in the discussions that are taking place apparently about a very large infrastructure renewal plan, that the steps are necessary that the administration is taking, but they're not sufficient, that the Congress has to come along. And with all of the other difficulties associated with today's Congress of the United States, the one that is the most important to overcome is the reluctance on some parties' part to pitch in to the fight and to recognize that the vast majority of the American people are very concerned or somewhat concerned about the climate that's changing around them. This is not a minority view across our country based on many, many polls. So I think the will of the people is there. What's needed is more explanation of what kind of individual and collective involvement we have to make by making the right choices in our daily lives, so that it becomes clear what the requirements are individually and collectively as we move forward, and that gets expressed to the Congress. At the moment, I think the Congress is the biggest hurdle. Eventually, we will all appreciate the effects of climate change, those of us who are still around, and we want to be able to deal with it now. As a matter of fact, we knew everything we know now about 40 years ago, and there was the will in the 80s to deal with this on the political side as well as in the other realms. But that has gone away, and we need to recover it because there's still time, but there's not much time.
Excellent, thank you. Sherry, you want to pop on your video, because I'm going to ask you a question. And I'm focusing this to you because there's a question about how the MAB is engaging with businesses and other organizations. So, you know, historically, and thank you, Lee, for laying out those reports. For those of you who don't know, we have most of these reports linked on the NSF website. But we will certainly provide additional links to them. But Sherry, how is the MAB looking forward? Are you engaging with the private sector as well on these discussions that we know are inherently not just a public sector issue? Lee pointed out issues and challenges in Congress, but how are you viewing the dialogue between the public and private sectors?
So I think climate and energy, and specifically this energy transformation that we are talking about both globally and in the United States, can't just be led by the public sector. This is like the perfect public-private partnership that has to happen. As you look at a lot of like what Tom was talking about, you know, so much of those DoD technologies are developed by the private sector. They are done in collaboration with the private sector. New and emerging technologies have to come from the commercial side. So in order for us to really address this problem in a material and market way, it's going to require total collaboration. The Military Advisory Board, their goal is to always bring kind of a national security voice to these issues. They look at this through a complete objective and unbiased lens of national security. So that's kind of, that's the lane that they tend to stay in. But in terms of conversations with the government, with the private sector, with industry, as well as with the energy industry, as well as with the technology sector, I think all of them have to come together on these issues. hope that has answered your question.
Excellent. Thank you, Sherry. Tom, I'm going to bounce a sort of both a national security and a technical question to you. And that goes to the issue of China. And how do we compete with China if China is not committed to the same level of commitment to things like environmental protection, human rights, those types of things in the development of their energy sector? And are there areas where China is excelling technically that the US could catch up or surpass in the near term?
There's a lot packed into that question. So first I'll start by saying that in terms of technology leadership, who's ahead? I think US has the technical edge, if you will, over a lot of other countries, including China. Where China has done more than the US is in deployment. They have been much better at putting renewable energy out on their infra than we have. But that's a matter of scale. They have a lot more people, they've got a lot more infrastructure. It's a larger country. So that's kind of to be expected. China's Belt and Road Initiative is a real concern. They're spending a lot of money around the world to ingratiate themselves to other countries. They're providing loans, they're buying assets, they're buying critical materials, particularly critical materials that are important to advanced energy technologies, lithium, cobalt, those kinds of things. They're trying to corner the global market in those areas. That's a concern. A lot of China's behavior doesn't necessarily ingratiate itself to the countries they're in. There are tactics that they use that play well in these host countries. So for example, they move in a lot of Chinese workers. Not a lot of the economic development flows to the people around these projects. They put together business deals that involve things like debt traps, so that the country that they're in has some of the financial obligations. They do cost overruns, and China winds up essentially bankrupting the other country's involvement in the project and being able to take over the project. Word gets around among these countries that be very careful getting in bed with China to participate in some of these kinds of projects. So I think it's important not to think about China as the 900-pound gorilla, if you will, but be very objective and clear-eyed about analyzing the actions China's taking and the effects that those actions are taking, both positive and negative. Both they play to our strengths because we aren't like that, as well as the things that actually do bring benefits to them, and we should calibrate our response accordingly. So I think it's important not to get caught up in the hype over China's actions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As we close, I'm going to give each of our speakers the 30-second magic wand that says, if there was one thing that you felt if you could control the universe, if there was one thing you could do to get us to net zero emissions by 2050, what would that be? And I'm going to start with Tom.
Gee, thanks. I'll say that I think the magic soup here really involves three primary things. It involves tech development, because I think tech is a pathway out of this. I think it involves investment to deploy that tech, but I also think it involves policy to set the market conditions to enable that tech to move forward. I think renewable energy is, the costs are coming down radically. PV, solar, storage, the cost curves are continuing to go down, and the levelized cost of electricity coming out of renewables now in many cases beats anything else in town, including natural gas. So I think a lot of the tech, a lot of the cost is coming along. What I would like to see is some of the policy barriers, of the technical barriers that have been put up within the marketplace for the purpose of maintaining the status quo taken down, and have policymakers and companies recognize that there is a bright economic future in different business models that we're living with today.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Lee, same question.
I think the important thing, in addition to those that Tom mentioned, which are spot on, is going to be mobilization of public will. And so the things that we can do to help mobilize public will are among the most important that we should do. And I'm thinking, as I look at the creation of an infrastructure package by the current administration, and I see that, at least so far, climate change issues are very prominent, dealing with climate change issues are very prominent in each of the choices as they're being portrayed right now. I think that is the kind of thing that needs to be spread far more widely through the political and through the financial structure of the United States. The world's reinsurance companies, the people who underwrite the big insurance companies that are retail, have already appreciated that there is enormous risk associated with not paying sufficient attention to the climate in the future. And they're pricing that into the structure. And so for those who don't believe yet that it's important to take action, that's, I believe, concrete illustration of the fact that people whose bottom line matters are already considering climate change. It needs to be factored into everything else we do, publicly and privately.
Excellent. Well, with that, thank you very much to Admiral Gunn and Tom Morehouse and Sherry and Sarah for joining us. We appreciate this discussion. I know it's one that's going to be, we are going to be very interested moving forward, because clearly there is an integral tie between energy and what we do in our energy portfolio and national security. Thank you, NSFers, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next program. And please let me know if you have any questions or additional input for our speakers. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Please stay safe. Thank you.